Hi guys, what's going on? Mate here. I'm really happy to finally make a new video, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about the track called Nincs neve, which means it has no name in Hungarian. And yeah, I'm going to tell you how the individual parts were created by me and also how I arranged it. So let's just have a listen to the pad sound. To be fair, I don't really remember how I created the sound, but I think it's just some kind of chord, a minor chord, I guess, which has a low-pass filter applied and with a long decay time and sustain as well. So it's just like one sound at the same volume all the time. And the interesting thing is, though, that I have this auto pan on it, and an auto pan is actually there to separate and move the sound from left to the right the way you want to by using these parameters. And if you just turn down the phase to 0 degrees, it's going to act like ducking. So you can change the volume at any specific rate by changing this parameter and the amount, of course, and you can create sidechain compression with it, or like a pseudo sidechain compression. And in this case, I have a 3/16 rate, which means that if you have one bar, you have 16/16, which makes sense. So it's going to be like a da 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 da. So then you have 16 hits, and it's the second bar. And what it does here is it needs 3/16 notes until the volume goes down to 0. And then it immediately jumps back to 1, so to the full volume, and then it's going to repeat itself. So it has a triplet feel to it, which you can hear in classical music like walzer, I think that's how you pronounce it, and it gives it a really nice, weird and exciting movement. So it's not the basic 4 to the floor sound. Yeah, so I really liked it and I wanted to keep it. And then I also have a Pro Q on it just to filter out the low frequencies, because you don't really want them to collide with the bass and the kick which you have in your track. Moving on to the kick, nothing too special. So I'm going to start with the compressor and just explain to you the basics of it and how I thought when I was adjusting the parameters. So the basic parameters are the threshold, ratio, attack and release time. And what you do when you choose your threshold is you basically tell your compressor at which level of the incoming signal I want to reduce the volume. So in this case it would be at -30 dB, a little bit more, but it doesn't really matter. And the ratio is just how aggressively it flattens the volume below this threshold. So if you want to read a little bit more about it, just do it. It's a really interesting topic, but I'm not going to go too much into details. Yeah, the attack time is there to tell the compressor how sloppy it should act. So if you just pull it down to 0, then it's going to pull down the volume once it gets below the threshold immediately. But in this case, if it's at 117 milliseconds, it's going to wait 117 milliseconds after the sound came, which was loud enough to trigger the compressor, and then it's going to compress. You can see the release time as the counterpart of the attack time, which basically means that once the volume is above the threshold, how long is it going to take until it loosens its grip of the compression? All right, so that would be the basic explanation of the most important parameters. And yeah, maybe the wet gain is just like once you have your compressor working, then you want to give back the volume which you lose by compressing. So you can do it by adjusting the gain knob. And yeah, that's everything what you have to know to understand what I did here. And in this case, I picked an attack time so that it actually lets the kick to pass the first half of the kick, so the really poppy transient part, the transient is like the loudest part of the signal, it gets through, but after that it's going to dip down. So it's really nice to have it to make the kick sound a little bit more poppy, a little bit more percussive, and yeah, it was the whole idea behind it. And the release time is short enough so that it's going to reset itself before the second, the third, and the fourth kick would come. And the ratio is, I mean, it depends on you. How poppy do you want to have it? And threshold depends on the loudness of the sample, of course. Alright, so let's move on to the Pro Q. Here I have, a tiny bit of a dip below, above 20 Hertz. I don't know why, to be honest. I didn't recheck it. It's probably because it had a little bit of, I don't know, a little bit too much of those frequencies, but you don't really hear them anyway, so I don't know. You could also delete it, but I'm just going to leave it there now. And at 5K, I have a dip too, because it sounded a little bit too poppy, so let's just turn it on. So without. With. So to be fair, the poppiness is also induced by the compression, of course, because I let the transients go through, but it still sounds a little bit different if you let them through and then you are going to reduce the high frequency content a little bit. It still has a little bit more of a bite, and I really like this sound, so I apply it many times. And last but not least, the limiter is not doing anything incredible either. It's just there to compress aggressively. So that's what a limiter basically does. It has a ratio 1 to infinity, and it makes sure that the transients won't go crazy and get too loud and destroy the balance of the mix. So if you want to, I really like to use it because it's a nice visual representation of anything you hear. You can just use Scope, which is a free plugin, to see what you're actually doing, because if you don't really have a nice treatment in your room or good headphones, which I don't really have, to be honest, I mean, they are okay, but not so amazing. It's really nice to just look at the waveform and how you change it. So let's just try it out with the compressor, for example. You can see how the transient is a little bit smaller and the belly of the kick is bigger, and once I turn it on, it changes. It has more of a steady slope. So I made a pretty long intro because it's more DJ friendly, so that's the only reason. So let's move to the bass. Here at this part, I actually like to do tiny variations because, I mean, that's the soul of any track, in my opinion. Like, you can have a nice kind of sound and a nice idea, but it's always the small nuances which really count. So I really just doubled the kick here at the end of the 16th bar to make it a little bit more exciting, you know, so to tell the listener, like, listen, now something new is going to come. And that's the whole idea behind it. Nothing too crazy, but it's really pleasing. So the sub bass, I really like this sub bass. I think it sounds great, and it really fits to the kick too. I mean, that's the thing with everything, I would say. Like, you can have a nice kick, like it sounds perfect, but it sounds like a piece of shit with some kind of sub bass. So it's you can't have amazing individual sounds and think that it's going to sound together amazing as well. You know, it's like having an amazing ice cream and an amazing pizza. Like, they are great, but you just won't combine them because they don't fit together. So that's the same here, but I mean, they do fit. So I think it's B to D let me think, C, D, it's a minor third, and I guess B minor would be the scale of the track, because that would be the root note. But correct me if I'm wrong, I would just think so. The bassline is really basic, but one thing which you may notice is that it's not starting at the beginning, because I actually wrote it by having everything on the grid, and then I eventually moved them away, because by doing so, it's going to sound a little bit more human, and also it's going to separate the transients, the loud beginning parts of the kick and the bass line too. So they're not going to collide, and it's not going to be a huge peak at the beginning of every hit. So as you can see, it couldn't be more basic. It's just a triangle wave with cutoff frequency of 800, so it's a low pass filter without, with, and also with a lot of resonance, actually 65%. So it's the filter would look not like this, but more like this. So the compressor acts like a sidechain compression triggered by the bass groove, but I'm going to get there in a minute. But let's just move on. I'm going to show you the percussion. Not that complicated either, but it works in my opinion. So it's a really dusty and crooked sound, so it doesn't sound so clean, and it doesn't sound so overly cleaned or anything, but I love this sound. I love when it sounds a little bit older, and I was really going for this kind of sound. Yeah, so it's DS drum rack. I guess it's a standard drum rack which you can find in Ableton's library too, and it's made out of Max for Live sounds. So if you don't know Max for Live, it's programming language which is not written in a linear manner, or you don't write it in a linear manner, but you do it by connecting different kind of objects. So you can have like a white noise generator and connect it to, I don't know, an ADSR curve or a filter, anything you want to. And by doing so, you can just put it all together and create a sound generator or an audio effect. And that's what the creators of Ableton did too. And they created all kinds of different percussion elements. So you have some nice parameters to tweak on. And yeah, if you are the nerdy kind of guy or girl, then feel free to check out Max for Live. Really, really nice. So it's an open head-ish sound. Really synthetic, but I really like it. This one is like the lead head, really snappy and short. And the clap is really, really, really dry too, but I think it just fits the track and the whole mood. So what I really enjoy doing when I am arranging a track too is to modulate the decay time, or also the reverb of any particular sound. So in this case, I really like to do it with the clap. And you can see there's a parameter called tail, which is basically just the decay time of the clap. And if I click on it, you see that I have it here a little bit higher. And if you have a listen to it, it's just a tiny difference, but I mean, as I said, the minimalistic stuff is actually what makes minimalistic music so interesting. So I can highly recommend you to do tiny changes like that, and you are going to be amazed how much of a difference it actually makes. So I also applied a high cut filter on it, just to make it a little bit more old school sounding and not that clean. And yeah, some limiting as well. to catch some of the peaks, to make it a little bit more compact and make it a little bit easier later on at the mastering stage to make it loud without having peaks which destroy and the whole mix and go below 0 dB. And then I have a saturation on it. If you don't know what it means, it basically adds harmonic, or it doesn't necessarily have to be harmonic overtones, but it gives overtones to your audio material. So by that I mean, if you have like 200 Hertz sine wave, then you are going to get 500, 400, 600, 800, 1000, so on and so forth. If you pick a harmonic saturation or overdrive. And by having a multiband saturation, which is a really, really nice thing to have, you can select the frequency band where you actually want to have the saturation. And I wanted to have it between 450 and 4K because those are the mids which I want to have a little bit more crispy. And that's actually the translation between saying what is crispy. Well, crispy means you just saturate it a little bit. So it's a really nice trick to make it sound a little bit more alive and not so much like music from your computer. And yeah, also one more low pass filter. And that's it, nothing fancy. I don't have any kind of groove or anything on it. It's really, really dry and really perfect without any displacements. So yeah, let's just move on. So it's a really lovely chord, which I sampled. I don't know which chord it is, I'm gonna be honest with you. It sounds a little bit dissonant, I don't know. But it's a nice one, as you can tell it too. Yeah, I applied the tape echo from FabFilter's Timeless. As you can see, I really love to work with FabFilter. They have amazing plugins. To make its tail a little bit more alive and to give it percussive quality as well, not just a harmonic one. And by doing so, you also lose the abrupt end of the sound too. So it's not going to sound like dump, but it's more alive. Yeah, and then I applied on the whole sample group, because I have one more piano here. Just compression to make the tail a little bit more even, so it's decaying a little bit slower. So without compression it would be like this, and this way it's going to be like, I don't know, like decaying a little bit slower. That's the whole idea. And I heavily bandpassed the whole thing to make it sound old school, you know, so as if it would come really out of a tape recorder. So already two new things are happening here. The first one is the shaker with automated volume, as you can see, to make it a little bit more fluid, so it's not coming in like from 0 to 100, but with a steady volume increase. And as you can see, I also have the multiband saturation on it. Which just gives a little bit of more life to it, and it doesn't sound so much like a sample, but it's a little bit richer and warmer by using the saturation. And yeah, also low cut, high cut, so I'm just really letting through one particular frequency band to also create space for the other elements. Moving on to the vocal samples, which I don't know, I think I used them for like 5 or 6 months now, and I really love to use them this way. So those are just, I don't know, some kind of sample pack, but really you can pick any kind of YouTube video. It's not really about the high quality of the sound, in my opinion at least. And just set some MIDI notes here wherever you want to. And if you are happy at the with the placement of the MIDI sound, then try to just move this arrow here to select the beginning of the sample. As you can see, I have everything in a group too, and I have delay on it as well. I don't know, it's default setting, so I guess I dialed in the parameters the way I like the sound of it. This effect called erosion is just there to add some overtones as well. I don't want to tell you anything stupid, so you can look up how it exactly does it, but it makes it a little bit more gritty, so that would be the word to it. And yeah, I also have an auto filter on it, which is a really nice thing to have on any kind of sounds if you want some more movement. And in this case, I have the frequency, the cutoff frequency at around 800 Hertz with resonance of almost 50%. So the really critical part about the auto filter actually is the LFO part, which makes it sound really alive, because what it basically does is whenever you turn up the amount, it's going to move around the cutoff frequency. The higher the amount, the more it's going to move around it. So if you have a tiny amount, it's going to move just like by plus minus 50 Hertz, and if you turn it up, it can go really extreme to like 20 Hertz to 20k. And the speed of the movement is determined by the rate parameter. So it's like 0.08 Hertz, which would mean that 1 Hertz would be 1 cycle in 1 second. So 1/10 of it would mean that it needs like 10 seconds to do a full cycle. So it's really nice to have slow movement because it just creates fluidity in your whole track. So I absolutely recommend you to use auto filter with an LFO, because it's going to change a lot in your sound and make it less static. Yeah, so use it. I use it all the time. So let's go to this part, which is a bass sample, which I found on the internet. So what I did is I cut up the whole sample and picked out some nice parts which I could use individually without needing any kind of context from the sample. And I just played around and threw them at different places on the grid, because I knew if it's going to be on a grid, it's going to fit rhythmically, because it's so short that it doesn't really need any kind of rhythmical reference. So as you can hear, also some saturation to fill some of the frequency gaps. And now we come to the point why I actually have a ghost kick. So I have a ghost kick because if you don't know what a sidechain compression is, it's just basically there to trigger the compression by an external sound. So let's say you have a bass line which has the same frequency like your kick drum, and you don't really want to have them collide all the time. So if you put a sidechain compression on your bass line and you are going to have as an external audio input your kick, then it's going to duck it and it means that it's going to reduce the volume every time the kick hits. So this is exactly what I did. I just applied the ghost kick on it, and the ghost kick is just there to do it all the time, because I have some tiny breaks sometimes here in my normal kick, or here, and the ghost kick is just going through all the time, even in the breaks, because I don't really want this bass to get weirdly loud in the breaks. So that's the idea behind the ghost kick. And then I have some EQ adjustments, which I'm not going to talk about too much, to be honest, because I don't know, I have a tiny dip here, maybe because of my kick. Like, don't hate me for not explaining every detail of it. A little bit of boost, dip, boost, blah, 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 because my ears told me so. So you know, listen to your ears, or let your ears listen, and don't be afraid to tweak the EQ parameters like I did for so long, and I still have my struggles with it, so don't worry about it. Just try it, boost it, cut it, and ask yourself in an honest way, does it sound better or not? And don't lie to yourself. Be honest. Be honest. Yeah, so some sample again, and some movement in the percussion too. I have a double clap at the beginning of the next bar, at bar 53, which I really like too, to be honest. I'm proud of it. You can just steal it if you want to, it's alright. I just doubled it at the beginning, and gave the second clap a bigger tail to, I don't know, to make it sound more fancy. I like the sound. I don't know what you think about it. It just makes some interesting movement, in my opinion, and it's always nice to have it a little bit more unexpected, you know, so you don't want to play or produce the regular kind of sound. So make it more interesting, make it a tiny bit weird, but not too weird so that the listener still stays in the groove, but he or she is like, oh, that's something different, I really like it, but it's not going to be, or he's not going to be like, what the fuck? So yeah, it was just my artistic choice to displace the clap or add some more claps at the beginning. So feel free to fuck around with the different kinds of MIDI settings you already have to make it a little bit more interesting. So don't just put it in a box and be like, yeah, this is my 1 bar MIDI loop and that's done. Like, come on, it's going to sound boring. So do some more and take the time. It's art. So so you have the second vocal here, which is just like the counterpart of the first one. So this one is called cycle because the person actually says cycle, and this one is different. So they have a nice harmony between each other, not in a musical sense, but they just fit together. Yeah, just a short kick break here, and I like to start the kick before the actual bar, because I always imagine that I'm dancing and listening to the music or to the DJ, and I like it when the kick comes in a little bit earlier, as expected, because it's like a surprise and you are like, fuck yeah, I love kicks, so why not earlier? So that's the whole idea behind it. So nothing too crazy happens here, so I'm going to jump to the break.
Different now.
So I just let the sample play a little bit longer because it's break time and you have to be cool. And if you want to be cool, then you need long vocal samples. Like, don't overdo it or it's going to sound really cheesy and cheap, but I think it sounds good in this context. So this is what I did, and I also let the bass loop a little bit longer to make it a little bit more exciting. You know, it's kind of like, I don't know, having some tiny candies which you throw at the listeners, and at this point you give like a whole bag because it's break time, so they are like, oh yeah, it's so nice, and then the kick comes back and they are like totally happy, you know, like candy, kick, clap, whatever. So here I have a new kind of hat, which I'm not going to over discuss because I already talked a lot. It's some kind of a sample, I guess, with a bandpass as well, as you can see, to make it a little bit more old school sounding as well. And I have a fab filter delay on it, like a short echo on it, and a tiny bit of auto filter with some LFO modulation to make it sound more interesting, just as before with the vocal samples. Moving on to the head OP, I don't know, I didn't name it. Just some random percussion stuff, nothing to overthink. One thing what many people do, me too, is before a new element would introduce itself, you prepare the listener by having like any kind of sound, and in this case reverse head, so or reverse crash. So I have a snare here, which is just a really pointy short sound, nothing too interesting, but it just adds to the whole percussion. And you know, you really want to steadily increase the tension of the whole track and make it always more saturated with elements. So it's nice to add tiny bits over time. As you can, if you have headphones or really proper speakers, I mean, it doesn't have to be too proper, you can hear that it sounds really wide, the open head here. And I just wanted it because the whole track sounds a little bit mono, and it's nice to have this stereo width used. So I have a short open head here, which I also highly recommend you to do anytime you want some more party in the room. Sounds really wide if you listen to them on your headphones or your speakers as well. And yeah, I bandpassed it too. And just as I told you before with the kick, it's just nice to have it a little bit earlier than at the beginning of the bar, because it's not that static, you know, it's a little bit more interesting. So nothing new happens here actually. So if you are interested in the arrangement, you can listen to the track. It's on my YouTube channel too. And what I did here is I duplicated the pad, and as you can see it has like -12 semitones, and here it's just the original file without some pitch change on it. And I slowly faded it in, and it's just there to fill the harmonic content. Having ride with the rhythm of fourths, it's really nice to raise the tension as well. And I noticed it for the first time. I mean, many people do it, but I noticed it as you and Even did it. So I think it's really nice to have this jazzy kind of ride, and it just adds some flavor and tension to it. So I'm not going to make it way too longer because I think you really get the idea. So what I did is just I released the whole tension by showing the whole sample, you know, and also just really listening to the sample where it resolves. So if you have any kind of chord progression like 2-5-1 or whatever, it's going to resolve at the 1. So in this case, I always build up tension by using those chord snippets, and only at the end of the break I use the resolution. And then when it's going again, I use some new parts of it to make it a little bit more interesting again. So it's not going to sound static, because if you have a break, you don't want to hear the same thing over and over. So that's why it's a nice way to add something tiny bit of a new stuff whenever a break is ended. And yeah, from this point on I have some variations here, like the delay time of one of the heads. I'm going to discuss this one just a little bit because it's a new one and it's like a really crooked one. It doesn't sound good. So it's like a really skippy head sound. And what I did is I took the original sound and a little bit deeper, like B2 and C3 would be the original sound, and moved them a little bit to create this skippy groovy effect. So it's really subtle, you can't really hear it in the context, but you can really feel it. So that's everything what you want to have actually. So not noticing the individual parts, but having a package of feelings. So yeah, that's everything I wanted to show you to this track. I would be really happy if you could support me in any ways. You can, I don't know, send me some kisses, some pictures of your feet, but you can also do it in a more classic way by buying my tracks and subscribing, liking the video, share it with your grandma, maybe even with your friends who produce music too. And if you have any kind of critic or ideas or anything you want me to make a video about, just let me know, write me a contact, write me a comment, I wanted to say. And until then, have a nice day, have a nice week, a nice year, whatever, and see you soon. Bye.